Well, this is chapter 9. It's taken me some time to put it together. It was a difficult chapter to write, but I call it Fall Mountain, so here it is. In the summer of 1977, when Chad was more than a year old, I had a growing despondency about him and our marriage. I felt deeply, although not always consciously, that my journey that prior year had been profoundly against my will. Nothing went according to plan. Much of my frustration converged around Dr. Pullman. He had been assigned to replace our chosen pediatrician without anyone consulting us the night that Chad was born. Nor did we revisit that decision in the weeks that followed. Our selected pediatrician had simply disappeared. No one ever said, "Do you like this guy or would you prefer another pediatrician?" Like most young couples at the time, we did not even consider that there was an alternative. Dr. Pullman had glossed over Chad's obvious condition at birth and while he was in the hospital. His only discourse with us since that time had been one of patronizing condescension. When he failed to respond to discussions I initiated in reliance upon my own pediatric medical research, he stoked my deepening resentment. Try as I might to have a real discussion, he simply ditched me each time. He made the decision to save our child without disclosing to us the likelihood of Chad's extensive damage. Neither had he sought our input regarding alternatives available to us then. We had been mere pawns in the tumult of chaos around a very damaged baby. To my way of thinking, Dr. Pullman and his medical team had effectively said, "Aren't we fabulous? With all of our sophisticated monitoring and interventionist drugs, we have saved your pathetic and grossly damaged child. We alone decided to save him, simply because we could." His case helped to hone our growing medical skills. The $100,000 we charged your insurance company is thanks enough. You get to take home a child barely able to breathe, much less thrive. Go now and live with it. I hated him. I just hated him. But Kate seemed to think he was okay, and that which undoubtedly made it worse for me. In my seasoned reflection now, softened with 40 years of life, I have come to know that while I did have good reason to be angry with Dr. Pullman, so too I recognized that he had become my scapegoat. As Elizabeth Kubler-Ross has taught us, we often go through 5 stages of grief when we suffer traumatic losses: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. I was firmly stuck in the anger phase, and I saw him in the vortex of it. Dr. Pullman himself had tried to prepare us for these oncoming stages when we first met him, the night Chad had been born. He had recited the canned speech, which is taught to all doctors in medical school for times such as ours. For obvious reasons, it meant nothing to us at the time. What might he have said differently? What would I have done about Chad had I known the awful truth? I truly do not know. The point for me then and now is that I was not consulted. I was not a participant in my own life. My child's life had been decided for us, not by us. I was not in control, and it was a totally foreign condition for me. Growing up, my family solutions came from dialogue. My parents consulted openly and reached decisions together. Their example was my best guide. I had often climbed out of my crib even before I could walk. I was very independent, but also very logical. Spanking me did not work. Reasoning with me did. By the time I was 5, they had concluded that having conversations with me about their expectations worked best. But that same dialogue and reasoning did not work in my marriage. Why a logical, expositive, mutually participatory pathway was not available was incomprehensible to me at the time. Over and over I tried that approach, all to no avail. It took many years for me to fully understand why my way could not exist between us. Our defective pattern would be repeated over and over in our marriage. Many years later, I have concluded that much of it stemmed from the very different ways Kate and I had been raised. But at the time, I felt only isolation and anger. I saw Kate's oblique and distant processing as little different from Dr. Pullman's vacuous condescension. The results were the same. They would decide, I would have to abide. Alone and fully advised, I might have taken a different course with Chad. As I saw it a year after his birth, had I known the likely outcome, I might have agonizingly debated letting him die the week he was born. Whether I could have truly done so at the time, however, I have no idea. Retrospective anger clouds our view of the decisions we made and the options we think we should have had. In any case, I doubt that Kate would have been open to that discussion, which in no way detracts from the deep and seething anger I had then for having been trapped in a situation not of my own making. And that anger certainly helped to fortify the barriers growing between Kate and me. The spillover of my own anger lingered in everything having to do with Chad. The more she seemed to withdraw into a smothering, protective, motherly enclosure around him, the more distant I became. But the rational, logical part of me, which I embraced as my essence at the time, was not living in a life in isolation. The karma I was to endure was precisely what I needed. There was more to me than I accepted about myself. The rest of me needed tribulation to emerge. Unbeknownst to me at the time, having Kate anchor that path was critical to my own life journey. In effect, her emotionally grounded presence saved me from myself. The deeper spiritual me needed this long, painful path to a greater awareness. Rational, logical me might have taken the easy way out. It was not to be. Nor should it have been any different than it turned out. Chad was a huge part of my grand life plan. I was precisely where I belonged. In the months following our visit with Doctors Pallas and Jenkins, we placed another round of ads hoping to find a person to help us out. We did not get one response for daycare or to provide live-in care with a free furnished apartment. Nothing was working. Living in a village of 1,500 people has its advantages, but unique or unusual services are not among them. One morning, Kate announced to me that she was going to call the State Department of Family Services to see if there might be some alternative solution for Chad. Even though placing Chad had been advanced as a positive alternative by Dr. Jenkins, I was caught totally unprepared for the potentiality of it. As the essential and fully engaged parent, Kate bore all the burden of caring for Chad. Even though he was nearly a year and a half old, he had not developed at all beyond infancy, and had to be cared for as such. His feeding times, each of them, were excruciatingly long. He seemed to only have two modes, contented and screaming. Fortunately, as his seizures were medically reduced, so too the screaming had subsided. Nonetheless, he was a very dependent and demanding child. But Kate's exhaustion, I believe, was more emotional than physical. Her fatigue came more from the depression she must have felt as the stark reality of Chad's lifelong debility became more and more evident. For many months since seeing Chad's CAT scan, I had known the worst, but I was alone in that assessment. Each time I attempted to have that discussion, the distance between Kate and me grew greater, and her envelopment of Chad seemed stronger and more all-encompassing. I drifted away, sensing that any harmonic synergy between us was impossible. If Kate had finally come to an assessment similar to mine, she had not shared it with me. In truth, the prime provider, the bonded parent, the committed adult nearly always is the greater decision maker regarding the care of a child. This is as it should be. But when there is a schism between a couple, the decider is all alone, and so is the outsider. All through that long, dark summer, we each walked alone. Kate made an appointment for us in Great Falls, and I took the day off to attend it with her. The hour-long ride was quiet, even devoid of small talk. After the usual wait, we were guided into a conference room. A thin, almost gaunt woman in her 30s entered the room with a taller, full-figured, and somewhat older woman. "Hi," the small woman said, half gazing at us, but mostly staring at the conference table. "I am Barbie, and this is Joan, our director and my supervisor at Region 3 DFS. Joan made easy eye contact with each of us as both women took their places at the table. "We understand that you may be seeking to place your son with us. Can you tell us about him? His name is Chad, right?" With that, Kate and I talked about Chad's birth, his medical needs, and our challenges in trying to care for him in our little town. "Are you seeking to place him temporarily or permanently?" "Temporarily," Kate responded. "I just can't care for him and teach. Despite our efforts, we have been unable to locate anyone to help us." We often provide a temporary placement when parents are unable to care for a child. We can provide visitation for you, and you can, of course, terminate the placement when you are able to do so. It may take some time for us to find a suitable placement for Chad due to his extensive and challenging needs. Please give us some time to explore our potential here, and we will get back with you. If you fill out the paperwork before you leave, we can begin. 2 weeks later, Barbie called Kate to let her know they had found a prospective placement for us. If we could drive to the home of the foster parents, she would meet us there. We set the date for a meeting. At that time, I could not imagine Chad being cared for by total strangers. How could a foster placement be best for our frail and damaged child? I took no stock whatever in Dr. Jenkins' comment to us that having another loving couple care for Chad could be beneficial to him, to them, as well as to us. I don't think Dr. Jenkins ever learned how prophetic he had been. All I can say now is, O ye of little faith. Thanks, that's chapter 9. If you like it, let me know. Feel free to share your own feelings. This, as I say, was a tough chapter because I had a difficult time converging my own feelings and the changing dynamics of our lives at the time. But you'll see how it unfolds shortly. Thanks so much.